Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, and welcome to the Gold Standard Leadership Lab. By day, I'm a partner at a leading advisory firm where I draw upon my background as an attorney to help my clients succeed. This podcast, though, is my personal project, completely separate and apart from my day job, but reflects the same passion that I exhibit everywhere for teaching, mentoring, and helping others succeed through simple, impactful lessons. It is my hope that you'll walk away with practical takeaways to help you on your leadership journey. Thanks for being a part of this community and for joining me in the Leadership Lab. Let's get started. As many of you know, I announced in episode 52 that after 1 year of consistently putting out the Gold Standard Leadership Lab every week, and hearing directly from many of you about the difference that this show is making in your lives, I committed to publishing a book on leadership. Now, as part of the work on the final chapter of this book, and really my overall thesis of the book, which is about the golden leadership cycle I created, I picked up a few books about the world's greatest eulogies. That's right, eulogies. And listen, it's not because I am morbid, but because the research that I was doing took me somewhere that I didn't expect. The more I read, the more I realized that most of us actually have the concept of a eulogy completely backward. We think of it as something that's spoken after the fact. It's someone else's job, a retrospective accounting of a finished life. And all we can hope for is that someone else gets it right for us. Now here's what's interesting though, is that it's not what the word eulogy actually means. And the gap between what we think it means and what it really means turns out to be a full leadership framework and aligns perfectly well with my golden leadership cycle. Okay, so let's talk about this word. The word eulogy comes from the Greek word eulogia. And there's two parts. The EU, meaning good or well, and logos, meaning word, reason, or meaning. Now at its core, a eulogy is really good words. More precisely, it is a well-spoken meaning about a person. Now here's what most people do not know. The Greeks did not use eulogia only for the dead. The Romans absorbed it and formalized it into laudatio funebris, a public speech delivered in the forum when a citizen of standing died. Those speeches were not expressions of grief, but rather arguments and public reckonings with what the deceased had actually contributed to the republic. So the question the Roman eulogist was answering was not, how did he feel? It was, what did he build? And does any of it still stand? The narrowing to speech at a funeral happening gradually, though, over the years, over the millennia. The word got stuck in a single context and lost almost everything that made the word interesting to begin with. So I want to take it back to the original meaning because it speaks volumes about leadership. So eulogos, as we said, means good words, good reason, or good meaning. The question I want to put to you today is, what is the eulogos of your leadership right now? Not after you retire, not at the service, right now, this week, based on the actual evidence of how you spent your time and attention. So that answer exists whether you look at it or not, in all reality. Now, if you recall way back when in episode 8, I spoke about a post I wrote in 2013 called Write Your Own Eulogy. So I've been thinking about this for quite some time, obviously. When I wrote it, though, I was obviously much younger, more confident than I probably earned the right to be, and the idea felt clean at the time. If you want to know what you truly value, think about what you would want said about you when you are gone. What I did not say clearly, though, is that there are two completely different documents that you could actually write, and most people default to the easier one without even realizing it. So let's talk through this. The first one is an aspirational eulogy. What does that mean? It describes the parent you want to be, the leader who helped others grow, the person who built something worth having, and it is clear and clean about what you want. It is often much less clear about where you actually are. So that's the first kind. The second kind is called the audit eulogy. You write it by looking at last week's calendar, something I covered in episode 43. You reconstruct what you actually did hour by hour, where your attention went, what you chose when you had a choice, and then you ask this question of yourself. If someone who had never met me read only this document, what would they conclude that I value? You see, the audit eulogy is more uncomfortable to write, and most people avoid writing it because they already know what it will say. Because the gap between those two documents, though, I want to emphasize that it's not a character flaw. It's just data. It is the specific measurable distance between who you are and who you intend it to be. The only question that actually matters, though, is whether you have a plan to execute in order to close that gap. And the gap has a name in the Golden Leadership Cycle. That's the reinvention piece of the Golden Leadership Cycle. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Legacy is not built in milestone moments. It's built on an ordinary Tuesday at 10 a.m. It is built whether you slept, whether you moved your body at all, in other words, did you do any exercise in the day, whether you were present at dinner, or whether you were physically in the room but mentally somewhere inside the 9 p.m. email thread. Because there is a big difference. Now, while those questions feel far removed from leadership, they aren't. You cannot hold your composure in a difficult client conversation when your nervous system has been running on cortisol and poor sleep for years. The physical disciplines and the leadership disciplines are on the same track. Now, I learned that myself by finishing my first full marathon a few months ago. Crossing that line did not feel like an arrival for me. It felt like a new question that I needed to ask myself. And that is, what does the data of my daily choices actually say about what I am willing to do? In episode 59, I covered the execution gap. That is, the distance between what leaders say they will do and what they actually do when the moment arrives. So that eulogy exercise is really the same gap, measured over a much longer time horizon. The reason people avoid the audit is fear, and it's not fear of failure, I should add. It's fear of the measurement. Because if I start looking, I will see how far I am from the person I said I was building. And that distance can potentially be painful. So here's what I want to say to that. The distance, it's actually already there. It's there for me, it's there for you, it's there for everybody. It exists whether you measure it or not. You, though, are choosing whether to work with accurate information or a comfortable approximation. That is a notable difference. Now, as I started doing the research for the book, I started tracing what different traditions across history have said about the eulogy and about what a life well led actually leaves behind. And what I found, honestly, is just utterly fascinating. Every major religious tradition arrives at the same place from a completely different entry point. The Jewish tradition has a word for the eulogy called hesped, and in Jewish law, the hesped is not primarily about grief. Its purpose, codified in the Talmud, is to redirect the living. The eulogy is legally required to be delivered in a way that moves the people in the room toward their own better choices. Think about it. That's not sentiment. That is the ripple effect built into the law of mourning. The deceased is gone, but the people sitting in the chairs are not, and so the hesped exists to set them in motion. Now, you'll also find the word eulogy appearing throughout the New Testament as a word for blessing, for praise offered to someone present. The Islamic tradition takes a different angle. There's a concept in the hadith, the recorded teachings of the Prophet, defined as continuous or ongoing charity. And the teaching is really precise. When a person dies, their deeds come to an end except for three. Okay? The three are: 1, structures they built that keep serving others; 2, knowledge they transmitted that keeps being used; and 3, people they developed who carry the work forward. That's a 1,400-year-old description of what leadership empowerment looks like when it actually works. In the book that I'm writing, I not only go over the Hindu and Buddhist definitions of a eulogy, but also talk about the Stoics and what Ryan Holiday's work on Marcus Aurelius and Seneca reveals about why ego is the single largest barrier to all of it. Now, something else that I'm doing that's very interesting. I traced the etymology of the word empowerment back through the Latin, the Proto-Indo-European roots, and they all mean powerful lord, right? It's a very interesting definition. Empowerment means powerful lord. To show that the M prefix, so the EM in empowerment, means really to put power into someone. So empower means to put power into someone. If you think about it, that's actually not even a motivational concept. It is a legally binding transfer to put power into someone. And the gap between performed empowerment and real empowerment is one of the central arguments of the Golden Leadership Cycle chapter on legacy. So today you can consider this to be the opening argument. The full case is in the book. Now, here's where the Golden Leadership Cycle becomes very, very specific. Reinvention is what happens when you look at the gap between the aspirational eulogy and the audit eulogy, and you decide it does not have to stay that size any longer. The moment when you stop defending the gap and start closing it is when the reinvention begins. It does not require anything dramatic. It just requires one clear look and one adjusted choice. Resilience is what allows you to stay in the work after the first real look, because the gap is almost always larger than what you expect. Resilience, as I covered in episode 45, is not softening the distance. It is staying anyway. One guardrail, one thing that you will not compromise on starting now. The empowerment, though, so the empowerment lives on the other side of that work. When your daily choices start aligning with the person described in the aspirational eulogy, something changes in how you lead others. You stop needing to be needed. Let me say that again. You stop needing to be needed. You start creating conditions where people operate without your constant presence or approval. The empowerment architecture is not available as a strategy until it is first a personal practice. You cannot give away that which you have not built yourself already. So reinvention closes the gap. Resilience helps you in the work of closing it. Empowerment is what becomes possible on the other side. So here's where to start. Not a framework, not a journal prompt, just this. After this episode ends, take 5 minutes and reconstruct yesterday. That's right, hour by hour. Where did your attention actually go? The answer should include topics such as meditation, gratitude, journaling, exercise, family life, and of course what you did at work and more. And ask yourself, what story does this day tell about what I value? If that story matches the eulogy you want written, well, you are much closer than most people get. If it does not, that gap is not a judgment. Rather, it is a starting point. What I encourage you to do is to write your own eulogy and read it. Then create a plan with measurable outcomes that helps you close that gap. Because the leaders that are worth following are not the ones who wait to be eulogized. They are the ones who author the logos of their leadership while they still can. Because that, my friends, is the work. And remember, leadership, it isn't about perfection. It is about progress. So take this lesson, put it into action, and continue setting the gold standard in your own life and at work. I'll see you all next time.